Hello, this is Deanne from Small But Kinda Mighty, and I'm excited to share with you a walkthrough of my completed accessible nature journal and how you can use this to introduce nature journaling to kids. If you're new to my channel or missed my previous video on this topic, then I will put a link to it in the description. In it, I explained what makes the journal accessible and how to put one together. While you're checking that video out, then please take the opportunity to subscribe to my channel and click on the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. Okay, let's get started with the walkthrough. Please watch until the end because I have a question I'd love your feedback on, and I'd also like to share a brand new free resource I've just posted to my website. For the dates in question, on my walk in our local park, I snapped a picture at the same spot and made a couple of notes about the weather and things I saw on my walk that day. For the journal, I wanted to create pages that, in terms of the background, gave you a feel for the weather conditions and reflected a stylized version of the colours visible in the sky, the tree line, the middle ground, and the foreground. The focal point for each page would be this tree stamp. A great idea for kids would be to take a picture at the same spot each day you go out and to use the picture as a focal point. These Instax cameras are great for this sort of thing. I got one for my birthday, so too late to use in the journal, but I plan on using it in the future. As I mentioned in my earlier video, I wanted to produce a journal that was very affordable, so most of the supplies I used were things I had on hand. In the blog post that goes along with this video, link in the description box, I'll list the supplies I used for each page. It was also important to me that no writing or drawing skills were required to complete the journal, so this could be done both by young children who hadn't yet learned to write, and also kids and adults with fine motor challenges. So most of these pages were done either directly on the lunch bag, which served as the journal page, or done on a separate lunch bag, then glued on and cut to fit. For a couple of the pages, I knew I wanted to get them really wet in order to get the effect I wanted, so I did these on gessoed watercolour paper, let them dry, and then glued and stuck them on the journal page. Watercolour paper is a lot thicker and sturdier, and it can survive being soaking wet without falling apart. We'll get to what gesso is in a minute. This first page was made on watercolour paper, and I used watercolour pencils because I wanted to blend the colours together so that I could get a sort of a thin, pale colour that was a good representation of a cold, windy day. But honestly, you could use anything you have on hand to make these bands of colour. Regular colouring pencils, markers, crayons, paint, pastels, gelatos. Just let the kids have fun and lay down some colour. Because the background was so sparse, I decided to embellish it with a few leaf die cuts I had. The foreground at the time was very brown and covered in stuff left over from the fall and winter, dried leaves, seeds, sticks. I also decided to stamp a Robert Frost quote on some pale blue scrap paper that I had, and I tore those up and then just brushed some ink onto the edges of each piece and glued them to the page. For page 2, yes, it actually was a snowy day in April. I got together some paper scraps that were the background colours that I wanted to use and tore them in strips, which I then glued directly onto the journal page. You can use wrapping paper, magazines, newspapers, flyers, scrapbook paper. The sky's the limit. Tearing is great fine motor work. It strengthens hand muscles and helps kids practice the kind of movements they need to use for writing, like pinching their fingers together. So I took the strips of paper, glued them to the page, and then used some watered down gesso on top of everything to give it this sort of snow effect. Now, what's gesso? Well, it's a primer. You can use it on an absorbent surface to make it waterproof. Liquid then doesn't soak in or bleed through. It also makes the surface you're working on stronger, so it doesn't fall apart or disintegrate. It's basically white acrylic paint with additional ingredients like chalk, and you can get it at the dollar or craft store. You can also get clear gesso, which is great for things like Bible journaling, and black gesso if you want your surface to start dark. The border of this page is permanent black ink. I can't remember if I used a Sharpie or a Copic marker, I'm not sure which, but then I just did some dots on it using a white paint pen. For page 3 of the journal, this was one of those cool, misty spring days where there's so much moisture in the air that even if something isn't green, it somehow looks green. So this is sort of a mood board with green as a theme. There wasn't a crying elf in the sky that day, but the colour of his tunic just seemed to fit in with this mood board. And the fact that he's crying just seemed to fit in with the fact that it was lightly raining that day. For the background, I used the netting from a Baby Bell cheese bag and used that as a stencil and dabbed green acrylic paint onto the netting using a makeup sponge. And I kind of like the little green conifer shapes that I got. I did see several squirrels that day, so there is a little squirrel there in the bottom left corner. I didn't see any swallows, but I did see lots of birds. So yet again, this is another example of something easy for kids to use on their journal pages. A stencil from some little cheese netting, stickers, washi tape, and as far as the acrylic paint goes, I used whatever I already had in my stash. But you don't have to use anything fancy. In fact, in general, I'd advise against using the heavy body acrylic paint that artists use because it tends to be too thick for most crafting projects. You can use craft paint from a store like Michael's or even the craft paint from the dollar store. You're just having fun with paint, so definitely don't spend a fortune. As I mentioned in my previous video, I got the inspiration to make a nature journal using lunch bags from Cat Hand. And in this little tuck spot, I put a label that I made. One side is an encyclopedia page that I covered lightly with gesso. It's got a Cocker Spaniel on. I don't think I saw a Cocker Spaniel that day, but I definitely did see dogs every day I went for a walk in the park. And then on the other side, it's a piece of scrapbook paper that goes with the green theme, and also a couple of embellishments that hopefully get across the idea that there was a lot of sort of brown, dead leaves and other stuff in the foreground at that time of year. Moving on to page 4, one of Cat Hand's prompts for her Mixed Media Morsels snack bag book was circles, and I used that prompt to make this page. First, I used plastic canvas as a stencil, and dabbed some blue, green and brown acrylic paint through it using a makeup sponge. Then I got together a bunch of scrap paper in the colours I wanted and punched holes in it using a 1-inch punch, and I then stuck the circles on the page. The focal point is a piece of light green scrap paper with a very bare tree on it that I tore from a piece of scrap that I had in my collection of leftovers. And just to add that punches, those lever punches that you can get to make circles and all kinds of different shapes, are really good for kids to use because they've got a big lever, and all they have to do is push down, and they can create all kinds of shapes. So highly recommend using those with kids rather than for example a stencil and trying to do some fussy cutting with them. That's going to be just frustrating for them, I think. Moving on to page 5, this is one of the other pages I did on watercolour paper. It depicts a day we had horrendous torrential rain. I stenciled some tree shapes using black acrylic paint and then applied very, very watered down black, green and brown acrylic paint onto the paper once the tree shapes had dried. Then basically plopped on drops of rubbing alcohol to give the whole page a rain splotched effect. Splotched, I think that's a word. So this one was actually really simple to make but quite effective, and I think kids would love to see the reaction of putting the alcohol onto the watered down acrylic paint. Page 6 is one of 2 pages where I adjusted the bottom of the lunch bag to give me a larger fold-out page. You can see how to do this in Cat Hand's video, and if you do decide to do it, then definitely do it yourself rather than get the kids involved. Cat's instructions are really straightforward, but it's really quite fiddly, and something that I would definitely recommend you doing by yourself if you want it in your journal. As I'm no doubt sure that you noticed, this page was a bit of a departure from my standard background because I wanted to celebrate the start of the very earliest spring tree buds starting to show. It was still too early for blossoms, but you could see the magnolia flowers getting ready, and it just seemed like we were on the edge of a burst of white and pink and purple. The page is an old encyclopedia page. I sort of roughly inked it around the edges. The flowers are lilacs I got from my front garden, and I used matte gel medium to both stick them down and then cover them to protect them. And I used on the other side of the page some flowers that I punched, and I got a little tag. I made a little flowery, pinky flowery tag to put in the wee tuck spot there. So yeah, it was all just sort of a flavour of pink and purple and flowers. Not here yet, but coming. Moving on to page 7, this was the first sunny day that I actually got to record in the journal. It wasn't warm, but it was starting to warm up. For the background, I covered a lunch bag with white gesso and then blended on some Distress Oxide ink. This is one of only 2 pages where I used a quote-unquote technical product because I wanted to see how it would look on the lunch bag paper. Distress Oxide is a product by Ranger for Tim Holtz, and you can get it at Michael's. I usually pick up a colour if I have a discount coupon to use up. You can use it like ink for stamping and blending, but because it's water soluble, you can also use it like watercolour for washes and other effects. I'll link to a video by Amber Creative where she demos 25 different ways to use this product. I like the oxide ink because it's a combination of dye, so translucent colour like other inks, and also pigment like paint. The use of pigment in the product makes it more opaque than other inks, and it also means its colour shows up on darker paper, and it also gives you a sort of chalky looking finish. I sprayed the blended ink with water from a spray bottle and then blotted it dry with a piece of paper towel. My focal point and the sun are both pieces of paper I stamped with blue and yellow acrylic paint using homemade sponge brushes or stamps. And overall, I really like the washed out effect of this page. I think it does a good job of conveying a sunny day in early spring. Before showing you page 8, I wanted to show you a picture of the day that inspired it, and as you can see, it was just a cloudy, dreary, brown day. I used Cat Hand's dendritic monoprinting video as the inspiration for this background. I had some heavy body dark brown acrylic paint and I used that sandwiched between 2 pieces of document glass to get some prints onto lunch bag paper. And I just think it's perfect for this day. It reminds me of tree bark and gets across like just the brown dreariness of the day with just a pop of green from that pale green scrapbook paper for the focal point. And then I used some scrap paper I covered in gesso for the clouds. Page 9 was the second of my fold-out pages, and it was also the first day when the trees had definitely started blooming. So I put together this page using a free vintage print of blossoming trees that I got from the Graphics Fairy, and I used a blossoming tree from a page of ephemera that I had for my focal point. And then for the fold in the sky, I made 2 colourful little butterflies just by squishing together acrylic paint on folded scrapbook paper and then cutting out a butterfly shape after the paint had dried. Page 10 was done on watercolour paper because I knew I would get the page very wet. This was one of those days that was so misty you couldn't tell where the clouds finished and the fog began. So I wanted to try and convey that by taking watered down black acrylic paint and brushing it along the top of the page, spraying it with a water bottle, and then just letting the paint drip down the page. Then I turned the page, rotated the page, and did the same thing at the bottom with some watery green acrylic paint. And then I just kept rotating the page, adding more paint, black paint to the top, green paint to the bottom, and water. and just letting them run down and mix until I got the look I wanted. Then just left it to dry. I did see a cardinal on my walk that day, hence the big stamp on the pale red paper. Yeah, I'm really pleased with how simple and effective this page was. Page 11 was another super easy page. I covered the page in the journal with some scrap sheet music. Then I used the homemade sponge brushes to stamp, I guess, and layer different colours of blue and green acrylic paint onto the page. The sponge brushes are really easy to make and would be a lot of fun for kids to paint with. I just got a couple of scrubbing sponges from the dollar store and cut them into the shapes that I wanted. Then cut a slit in the scrubby side, stuck some hot glue in the slit, and then pushed in a popsicle stick I'd cut in half to use as a handle. And that was it. At this point, I remembered that I'd forgotten to show you what I had stashed in the tuck spot between pages 7 and 8. It was basically a tag that was craft paper on the back and then just some scrapbook paper on the front. And I had used matte gel medium to glue down some pressed flowers from my front yard. There was Forsythia is the yellow one, and then the blue ones are more lilac. Page 12 is the last page in the journal, and this was actually the first really sunny and warm day of spring. I've used more of the sponge stamped yellow page for my focal point to hopefully convey that. For the background on this page, I wanted to see what the Distress Oxide ink would look like when used directly on lunchbag paper, but I also knew the paper would get really wet. So I first used clear gesso, and then I dragged the ink pads onto a craft mat, which left the ink on the mat, sprayed the ink with water, and then smooshed the lunch bag pages down onto the wet ink to see how they picked up the colours. I did that a few times to get some layers and with a few different pages, and after they dried I tore the pages into strips and glued them onto the last journal page. For the last tuck spot in my journal, I got some flowers given to me by Natasha from Floral and Brick. These were locally grown, and I pressed them and dried them and then put them in this self-laminating material that I got from the dollar store, and I think they turned out really well. Here's a picture of some of the little treasures that I put together for the tuck spots in my nature journal, and here's the completed journal. Now you've seen all the pages, I have a question for you, and of course I have to share the freebie with you. The question is, I've numbered all of the pages from 1 to 12. Do you want to see a demo of how I made any of these pages? If yes, just let me know which page number you'd like to see a demo of in a comment below. If no, that's fine too. As far as the freebie is concerned, there's a link in the description box, so click on the link, head on over to my website and download the free PDF file, Nature Journaling for Kids. So if you're a parent or educator and you're saying to yourself, this is all very well and good, Deanne, but how exactly am I supposed to get children outside. And given that we live in, let's say, one of the largest cities in North America, there isn't really very much nature for us to be journaling. My answer to you would be, give the digital download a try. It's free, and it's exactly why I put it together, is for parents, teachers, homeschoolers, people who live in an urban environment, which is most of us these days, but still want to encourage their children to spend as much time as possible outside, to play outside, and to feel a connection with nature, even though they may live in the city. I hope you enjoy it. See you soon.